Okay, thank you all for taking your time and attending this event. I welcome you all with immense pleasure and gratitude to this event. Uh, this event is actually supported by the Diversity Scholarship Program at the Virginia Tech. I would like to thank Dr. Justin Grims, and he's the Assistant Director of Office of Diversity and Inclusion, and Shania Clandestine. She's part of the supporting team. I would also like to thank Purvesh Dongre. He's a graduate representative, Commission on Equal Opportunity and Diversity, Virginia Tech, and Professor Peter Schmidener for his help and encouragement in the process towards conducting this program. And of course, Dr. Francois Debrix for his constant support along the way. He's the director of Aspect, by the way. So it is in the wake of recurrent attacks against Asian communities in the United States that this event is actually taking place. And while these attacks function to reinstate, in a way, the category of race as a master signifier to understand various forms of oppression, some of the aspects of how the white supremacy thrives in the United States deserve a serious attention, including its allies from the South Asian communities of hegemonic status. Right? So, in other words, the political right wing in the US often appears to be a composition of various other hegemonic factors, including caste. Right? So, while race being a master signifier and often actually race captures South Asian communities in a single frame by leaving out the nuances of power and hegemony, a counter argument cannot be predicated on issues like caste being an internal matter, because simply it's not an internal matter. Instead, well combined with the white supremacy in the United States. So this also sort of led me to thinking about organizing this program. So this kind of like how to actually think about caste, is that like an internal question within the South Asian communities, particularly Indian community, or does it have something to do with a larger racial question in the United States, right? So there is also a historical connection often maintained between Gandhi and Martin Luther King, contributing to this construction, which actually, in fact, invisibilizes another history of anti-caste and anti-race solidarity in the United States, which is between, we could see, as we can see, between Bhimrao Ambedkar and W.E.B. Du Bois. Right? So I'm sure you all are sort of aware of the exchanges between them, and I feel like it's our sort of responsibility towards building upon those histories of conversations and exchanges between people like Ambedkar and Du Bois, and to think about or to develop a critical social thinking and solidarity politics to that line. So since the publication of Isabel Wilkerson's book on caste in the US, the debate about caste and race is drawing more attention these days. And however, an anthropological account of both might reveal several structural differences between the two in their social operations. This, however, cannot prevent us actually from thinking about a critical solidarity combining the two. Right? So while South Asia is a big part of so-called global South, and caste cannot be the only factor that constitute the social difference and oppression among those communities, this event is an initial attempt to think about the community in critical terms. Right? So other social and political categories such as religion and gender should of course be accounted in such exchanges. However, this program is imagined more as an attempt to initiate debates and conversations among international students in particular in the campus to create a more sensitive and democratic atmosphere in our engagement. So we have Teresa Matthew from City University of New York. So she's an activist and researcher, and she holds years of experience organizing against Hindutva right-wing groups in the United States from an anti-caste perspective. And we have Trevor Jayaraj, who is researching in the field of caste, violence, and narratives in the Indian context. He's a PhD student in Aspect, Virginia Tech. I thank them for kindly accepting the invitation to speak in the event, despite short notice. And Professor Peter Schmidener, who has been teaching South Asian culture and religion over past several years at Virginia Tech, is moderating this event. And he conducted a similar program before about caste from a Bahujan perspective. And he invited a Bahujan anti-caste activist from Hyderabad to deliver a talk about caste It was like in 2010, right? Am I not sure? I'm sure he can more to share about that with you. And after these speeches, we have a Q&A session for the audience. So kindly let me know your names in advance, or you can just message using the chat box to Peter Schmidhenner, so that we can call you in order to make your comments and or ask your questions. And let me turn it over to Professor Schmidhenner. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Shaw. And I was wondering if you might say a little bit about the, as part of your diversity grant, you're doing a survey. Can you say something about that?
Oh, sure. Thank you for that. So as part of this project, I'm also doing a survey. So that survey actually meant to invite people to reflect on their belonging, especially South Asian students, and how actually most of the people here we have coming from dominant communities, right? And we have a serious lack of people from lower caste Bahujan communities coming to the United States and doing their research, etc. So I was curious to how actually students who are already in the campus reflecting on the social stratification and the issues of caste and power that operates within these communities. So so I have received several responses to that survey, and people think that caste actually a major category, but the problem that most of them actually don't have an experience of interacting with people from people of who actually gone through a caste experience in the United States. So that sort of that is also part of this project, and I hope we can talk further after the presentations about that, I guess. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Shaw. So I am the moderator of this event, and when Shaw asked me to moderate, I said that's fine. Keep in mind, I'm a moderator. I'm not an expert in these subjects, but I'm just going to share with you a little bit about my own journey in understanding the intersections of caste, religion, and race. So this journey really begins with my childhood and adolescence growing up in South India as the child of missionary parents, Lutheran missionary parents from the US. And one of the things I often encountered as a child, I would be confronted by Indians and say, "What are you doing in India?" And basically, my first reply would be, "Well, I'm here because my parents are missionaries." Well, you can imagine the kind of responses I would get to that answer. So there were some who would, respond by saying they respected the work of missionaries, especially in the fields of education and, hospitals. And also some mentioned, Christian missionaries have done a lot to empower the lowest segments of Indian society. So that would be one kind of response I'd get. Another kind of response I would get is complete silence. A conversation ender. In other words, they didn't want to talk to me anymore after learning I was as a missionary child. And the third kind of response I would get was, well, Christian missionaries really shouldn't be out here converting people from their so-called natural religions, right? And so those are, and especially with a religion that was part and parcel of British colonialism. Okay, so, and I will say that Gandhi himself, he opposed conversion, but he, as you know, he was very receptive to various religions, including Christianity, and deeply influenced by them. But he himself didn't think conversion was a good idea. Hidden in a lot of these responses, I feel, was the fact that they might not have a problem with the fact that my parents were Christian missionaries, but the fact that my parents were working predominantly among Dalit Christians, okay, which was mostly their, I don't, for lack of a better word, clientele. Um, so, you know, we're going to hear more from fellow presenters about the perspectives of Dalit Christians, and I will say from the forefront that, you know, I'm a white male. I can't really speak from the perspective of those who have suffered discrimination. So I want to make that clear. You know, Dalit Christians have not only had to endure being from the lowest segment of Indian society, but also the fact that they're Christian as well, a so-called foreign religion, right? So a double whammy, so to speak. And I would argue that one of the greatest legacies of Christian missionaries in India has been the empowerment of the lowest segments of Indian society, something that more and more Indian scholars are acknowledging. However, this is something also that I feel has kind of enhanced resentment against Christianity in India from people of, you know, higher segments of society. So that's a little bit about what I experienced growing up in India. I'm going to jump forward to my experiences in the US, in Virginia Tech specifically. When I came to the US, I ignorantly thought that, you know, caste distinctions disappeared among Indian Americans. You know, they were highly educated after all, economically prosperous, and they've formed a kind of distinct community in the US. And I'll recall Gandhi again. You know, when Gandhi went to South Africa, spent 20 years there. This is one experience he had. You know, Indians came together. They didn't think about caste distinctions, religious distinctions. They worked as one. So I kind of had that feeling. This is what happens among Indian Americans. But, you know, of course, gradually I've been, my eyes have been open to other kind of realities. And I want to first point to the plethora of Indian American organizations centered in, you know, different language groups, different religious groups, yes, different caste groups, and other such, you know, markers. I'm most familiar with the vast variety of Telugu associations in North America. So if you Google Telugu associations, you'll find that there are, you know, regional chapters, city chapters across the U.S. But there are also, to my astonishment, various national level organizations. This shouldn't be an astonishment, really. So there's an organization called the Telugu Association of North America, the American Telugu Association, and also a North America Telugu Association. So what's really the difference between these associations? I've discovered over the years that really the difference is what communities belong to these organizations. So there is a caste consciousness in these organizations in the U.S. So that's a little bit about that. I'm going to just give a few personal incidents at Virginia Tech that have helped broaden my perspectives on these matters. As Sean mentioned, back in 2008, I invited a historian friend from India, from Osmania University, Hyderabad, to give a talk at Virginia Tech. And we were debating what title his talk should be. And finally, he presented this title to me, which I thought was a good one, De-Brahmanizing Religion and Caste in India, a Dalit Bahujan Perspective. Well, when I started advertising this talk around the Virginia Tech community, I met with some objections from some members of the Indian community that this was not a favorable title. And I sought some help from another Indian student who was a member of the organization AID, Association for India's Development, who is also co-sponsoring this talk. He himself was a Brahmin, and he actually took the part in responding to the objections. And he basically told the objectors that, you know, these perspectives have not been heard, and in order to gain a more rounded perspective of Indian history, they need to be heard, essentially. There were no further objections expressed after that, but to me, this whole incident kind of was evidence that, casteism was in play in the mere objections to the title of this talk. So that was one incident. Another incident, not incident really, it was in 2013, Virginia Tech had the visit from, I hope I'm pronouncing this right, my Tamil is not that good, Tenmoli Soundarajan. Is that, I don't know if you all know who she is. She is a Indian American Dalit activist, Tamil. And for the first time, I heard a perspective, a very moving perspective of a Dalit Indian American about how she and her family had faced discrimination within the Indian American community. This was very eye-opening to me. Now, I'll just mention another work which I have read recently, which was also very eye-opening to me, and some of you may be familiar. It's a book called Ants Among Elephants, An Untouchable Family in the Making of Modern India. The author is Sujata Gilda, who is a Dalit originally from Andhra Pradesh. She is currently a subway conductor in New York City, but she also writes Telugu poetry. But it's very interesting that she tries, more recently, she is trying to connect her experiences as a Dalit in India to the kind of casteism she's almost experienced as a subway conductor in New York City. And last year, I remember reading an op-ed piece in the New York Times about her experience of driving the subway in the pandemic, and how there was a kind of pecking order in the subway community. And so she talks all about this. It was very interesting. Last, I'm going to just share a few experiences I've had about, teaching about caste in my classes at Virginia Tech. In my classes, particularly my classes on Indian history, I usually have a fair number of Indians or Indian Americans in my classes. And sometimes I get the sense from them that their white American professor really doesn't know what they're talking about. And because they're Indian or Indian American, they're more the expert. So I get that kind of attitude. It's never directly expressed to me. And, they say things like, oh, we're not caste conscious, and, concerns with caste disappear as people become more educated or as people move in more into urban areas. Shah has heard some of this. He's been my TA this past semester, so he's heard some of this expressed. So I often have to remind them that, they're generally in a very privileged position among Indian Americans, and that if they came from lower caste families, their views would probably be a lot different, especially, views expressed by people like Tenmoli Soundarajan. So I just want to end by mentioning two works that have been kind of influential in broadening my perspectives about casteism, both within India and abroad. We were talking recently about, or I think Suchitra and we were talking recently about how the pandemic has made available all these sessions by Zoom, which were never available before. So one of the things I attended recently, the school I attended in South India when I grew up is called Kodaikanal International School. They've had a series of talks, monthly talks. And a couple months ago, I happened to listen to a talk by Ajanta Subramaniam, who is an anthropologist at Harvard University, who happened to go to the school I went to, Kodaikanal International School, much later than I did. But she talked about her most recent work, which the title of it, if any of you are interested, is called Caste of Merit, Engineering Education in India. And in this book, she explains how, casteism continues to permeate the engineering education and the engineering profession in general. And this, of course, transfers over to the US. I'm sure some of you are familiar with, the Cisco case in Silicon Valley, where a Dalit Indian engineer has complained about harassment from higher caste Indian engineers in a certain company. So that kind of thing is there. So teaching about these incidents, of course, is very eye-opening to many of the students in my classes who are, after all, aspiring engineers. So this is very eye-opening for them. Shaw already mentioned the book of Isabel Wilkerson's recent book, Caste, The Origins of Our Discontents. So this has helped illuminate parallels between casteism and institutionalized racism in this country. So that's about all I want to say. My journey to better understand these subjects and teach them better continues today as I learn more from our fellow presenters. So I'm going to stop there. And I will remind you, if questions come up, we'll probably wait until the end to do the Q&A, but if questions come up as we're going along, please post them in the chat. Okay, so we have two speakers today, and I'm going to briefly introduce our first speaker, who is Teresa Matthews. Shaw said a little bit about her. She is currently pursuing a PhD at City University of New York in public health. And I have a question for you, Teresa. Why public health? I'm just kind of curious about that. She's involved in various Dalit Bahujan movements and ventures based in the US. She also holds years of experience organizing against right-wing Hindutva groups in the US. Also, she is specifically concerned about the issue of increasing saffronization of the academy, and also concerned with the mobility of lower caste people in the educational sphere. And she comes from Kerala originally. So Teresa, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you for that introduction. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. And thank you, Sean, for inviting me for this conversation. I am gonna just actually go right to answer your question. I have decades of experience in public health, so I decided to get my doctorate in public health for some reason, and I regret it immensely. But yeah, so that's why. So I have a lot of experience in public health. So I'm going to actually just jump right into my presentation because I feel like I have a lot to cover and I don't want to take up too much time. Can you see the screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Okay, great. So I'm going to actually focus in the next 15-20 minutes on the Hindu right organizing, and specifically try to think about how it looks like in the academia, and try to think, bring in all of the issues that this conversation is concerned about in terms of caste, race, and all of that, and share some of my experiences in terms of organizing against these formations. Okay, academic for saffronization. There's all kinds of ways to think about how academia in the US is being slowly and very surely saffronized and organized. But the way I'm going to organize this conversation is by talking about three extremely broad strategies through which the Sangh is organizing here. One is through right-wing Hindu student groups. Second is through institutions and professors who are right-wing. And third is international academic programs to India that support and sponsor students to India, and why this is part of the whole way in which the Hindu right organizes educational institutions. So it's really impossible to talk about academic saffronization without talking about California textbook struggles, which Professor Peter already touched on. But I want to quickly go through what that is, and I'll try to make it fast. So the California textbook struggles comes up every 10 years. 2006, there was a huge movement. In 2016, there was a huge movement, and it has to do with the certification process for sixth grade history, social science textbooks. This is an extremely big deal. California is the site of some of the oldest Indian American diaspora in this country. They have been there for 100 years, right? So one of the earliest waves of Indian immigrants were to the Ghadar party and all of that 100 years ago. They were farmers and students and all of that. They landed in California. So they have some of the oldest and largest Indian population. And so it is of no surprise that this struggle is there. And what has happened is that multiple million-dollar Sangh formations like the Vedic Foundation, the Hindu Educational Foundation have mobilized and submitted a list of revisions that seem minor to a larger mainstream American context, but are actually very critical objectives of the American Sangh, both here and in India. Wanting to remove the word Dalit, wanting to talk about Jati groups as more self-governing kind of systems that isn't as bad as it might seem. Removing the word Sikh to describe Sikh immigrant activists and scholars, instead using the word an immigrant of Indian origin. Using India instead of South Asia is an extremely volatile and extremely trigger point for many Sanghis and many people, right? Arguing that places like Afghanistan, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Kashmir were once part of India. And I hope we all know that India is about 70 years old and not thousands of years. Wanting to get rid of the word Indus Valley civilization, and instead of that, saying Indus Saraswati civilization, which is straight out of Hindu mythology, adding made up rivers to the conversation. So there was a huge mobilization of South Asian scholars, groups, all kinds of people from across the United States under an umbrella group called South Asian Histories for Coalition that mobilized against each of these kind of revisions. And it's actually extremely long and much beyond what I've shared with you. But it's an important moment that occurs every 10 years and has like a national thing. And this is one of the petitions that was submitted that wanted to erase caste and caste neutrality, or talk about caste in a particular way. And this map that I got, and I have the source for it, is a very good way in which the Sangh is organized in the US. It's really important to understand the BHP and the HSS are some of the oldest diasporic organizations in the US. They have been around since the 70s, right? So because they have been around in the 70s, the influence has been in multiple spheres, right? They have spawned multiple groups, and they have had an influence in Hindu-American particular cultural thought that is really impossible to underscore. Okay, so one way in which academia is informed, is being kind of saffronized, is Hindu right-wing student groups. 1970, as I said, we established a branch in New York, and one of their goals that they finally realized in the 90s was the establishment of the Hindu Student Council. The Hindu Student Council is not a normal student group at all. They are a fascist, right-wing saffron group that is one of the most extensive Hindu student groups in the US. They have over 30 chapters all over this country. And over the years, the Hindu Student Council has revived various other forms of Sangh student groups. Some examples are Hindu Seva, Students for Holi, the Hindus on Campus, Hindu Youth for Unity, Virtues and Action. All of them are active across this country, and I bet you have some chapters in Virginia Tech as well, if you look. So these groups do, what do they do? They have, well, I'll go back. They do many things. They do yoga, Hindu cultural moments, Bollywood nights. All of that is kind of normal. And I think that there's a way in which they include a lot of perfectly ordinary, non-radicalized Hindu students who just want to kind of get together with other kind of Hindu students and have like a student club. But within this group, there are ways in which they have managed to bring in, normalize a certain kind of Sanghi, right-wing fascist thought that is important to pay attention to. They have sponsored right-wing leaders. They have put out statements about right-wing formations and Indian national formations in India. They have also been funded by the VHP. They're originated from the VHP. So in recent years, they have done some, or recent months, actually, they have done a bunch of things that are, that are important to pay attention to. One is it's a concerted harassment of Professor Audrey Trusky, who is a professor at Rutgers University. She's a South Asian scholar who has faced a lot of fear, and she's been in the public eye a lot from the Hindu nationalists. But in recent months, the Hindu Student Council, along with Hindus on campus, has had a huge, massive campaign against her, which has just been including petitions, meeting with Rutgers University administrators. They just recently put out a 30-page report on her. And all of this is a concerted harassment of this professor. And any professor that kind of talks about this issue, talks about Hindu nationalism, faces this from the Hindu right formations in the campus. There's also a generation of a lot of reports and noise on something called Hinduphobia, which has included like that screen shows Hinduphobia conference that seems to have some academic sponsorship or academic kind of legitimacy, but they're actually VHP organized. The HAC and VHP are indistinguishable from each other. They're organized by these right-wing formations, and there's no accountability for that. There was a really influential report that the Hindu American Foundation, which is another right-wing formation, report wrote on bullying against Hindu students. This report has had a revival in recent months. And there's a lot to say about that report and why that report is really problematic. And I can answer questions about that if anyone has that. And then if folks have been following the issue around Rashmi Samant, Rashmi Samant is the first Indian woman to be the president of the Oxford University. That's her Oxford University Student Union. And she went on to make some nasty, anti-Semitic, racist, transphobic comments within the first week of her like appointment as a student president. And she extremely rightfully was asked to leave her post, right? This is a person who it would be an embarrassment for her to represent student bodies anywhere with any kind of sense of decency. But this issue has been taken up by Hindu student groups across both in the UK and the United States, and including the Indian government. Right, the Indian government has taken this up with the UK and required that the external affairs minister has gotten involved in the Rajya Sabha and asked that India do something about this issue with Rashmi Samant. So not only is this kind of this thing that has blown up in this really bizarre way, but the ways in which it has been presented is that this is about racism and it's against Hindu students and it's about colonialism, using a very seemingly progressive language to shroud some really despicable behavior from somebody who shouldn't be doing those. That kind of way in which academia has come under the influence of the Hindu Sangh is to institutions and professors. And these are just a handful of ways in which endowments and money and chair and professorships are going to right-wing nutcases, right? In 2016, UC Irvine's New Takar Family Dharma Civilization Foundation started the Vedic and Indic civilization studies. They have completely clear, alarming ties to the Sangh Parivar. They have the ability to influence hiring practices of professors. They have the ability to influence South Asia research, and they do. And there was a petition against using these funds, and these are $1 million funds, of course, like several $100 million funds. This is not small money. There was a movement against it, and it was successful. University of Southern California, they received a 2-year Swami Vivekanand visiting faculty fellowship. There's a Center for Dharma Studies at Claremont Lincoln University. The Raj and Deepak Center at Columbia University in New York City is a very great example of a more local, like in the New York City context. Sangh formation that has repeatedly, it was founded by somebody whose name I'm forgetting right now. He's part of, he's a huge Modi Bhakt, and he regularly showcases, the Deepak Center regularly showcases various Indian BJP people. And then there's academic conferences that feature right-wing leaders, like Harvard's and MIT's India conferences. There are visiting professorships for Subramaniam Swamy, Infinity Foundation, Rajiv Malhotra. If you know these people, these are all very right-wing, hard right-wing people who have now been kind of normalized in academic spaces. Just to give you a sense of who these people are, this is Rajiv Malhotra's just most recent gem, right? This is the kind of thought that he puts out there. And this is a man who's getting legitimacy from places like Columbia and Harvard. He recently wrote a book, or I don't think this is actually that recent, but he's recently become very obsessed with like digital and like artificial intelligence. So he raves a lot about that. But I wanted to share just like a little bit of the video that he put out when he wrote this book on academic Hindophobia. So that's a Rakshasa with the professors. So, to anyone who's familiar with the RSS and the Hindutva movement in India, these images should be very familiar, right? So what the Hindu right is fighting, they are the militant Hindu god warrior figure who's fighting demons, who are the South Asian professors, right? Who are these various South Asian Ravan heads who they are fighting against. So, so these are the images that are that are evoked, that are normalized within spaces like okay. So the third kind of way in which academic saffronization is happening is through international academic programs that seem benign, that are about cultural exchange, but actually work to do a lot of normalization of India's policies, India's right-wing policies, and normalization of Sangh logics. So one of the ones that I was personally shocked by was the Consulate General of India sponsoring a CUNY India Study Abroad program. I don't know if folks know anything about the City University of New York, but CUNY is one of the largest public universities in the country, one, if not the largest. It is definitely one of the largest. And what that means is that most of CUNY students are Black and brown immigrants and overwhelmingly first-generation college goers. So what does it mean that the Indian government is reaching this community and sending a select group of people? All of these colleges have working class communities, first-generation college goers, Black and brown people, right? These are not the white elites of New York East Coast universities where the Sangh is thriving, right? They're trying to make inroads into places like CUNY where the Sangh has very little presence, right? And so they go to this study abroad program takes students to India, not a university. That would actually be useful because universities are very political spaces in India and everywhere, but to Ikson Ashram in Bombay, right? And Ikson is a VHP offshoot. right? So they've taken there in this tourist eco village, God knows for how much money, and then like they spend a few weeks in this extremely carefully monitored way, and it should be alarming. And the other kind of example of the ways in which this foreign exchange come to India and learn about India and earn like college degrees is this dude. I'm sure you heard of him when the news of the insurgency was in the news a lot. Vincent Xavier. He's the vice president of one of the largest Malayali member organizations in the United States. He's not some random troll as you would assume with these Trumpian people, but he's somebody with a lot of clout, and in fact he's a Congress supporter, right? He's not even BHP. He was a Congress supporter. He's met with Shashi Tharoor. He talks about how when he was in Kerala he had a good time with the RSS, all that. And then he's also somebody who started a think tank in Washington DC called the Indo-American Center. And one of the things that the think tank does is send students to the University of Kerala, right? And University of Kerala to give them a very Brahmanical, very pristine, very normalizing kind of experience. Okay, so I don't know how much time I have. I'm going to go through this very quickly, and I'm very apologetic about that. But I wanted to make a few very important points. South Asian Diasporic Organization is larger, more complicated than its India-centric presumptions. The well-funded $1 million social projects that I just very quickly described should not be mistaken for a mass movement, right? I mean, we can have conversations about what a mass movement is, but something that is constructed and costs lots of money. I'm not sure how much of a mass movement it is. Instead, it should tell you about the global reach of the Hindutva project and how the apolitical liberalism of Hindu American diaspora often ushers in this right-wing fascism. And I wanted to touch on like key moments of diasporic organizing. I'm going to go through this extremely fast, but they're important to mention, right? All of these moments has changed how we talk about organizing against the Sangh or organizing in general South Asian spaces in important ways. So Modi's visa denial is a key moment that we still use today, right? When we talk to people, we still say Modi was denied a visa because of his role in the genocide. And that was a mass movement across the US that multiple groups, multiple organizations, multiple people came together to build, right? And that included protests, rallies, and finally a sponsorship from a senator in the US that successfully denied him as a visa. And that pissed off a lot of people, right? That had a huge counter reaction as well. The second is the Dalit Women Fight North American tour, and the professor has already mentioned that Tenmui Soundarajan and Equality Labs. That group, it is before the Dalit Women Fight North American tour that happened. The way in which diaspora talked about caste was very anthropological, was very cultural. This is something that is part of our culture. There was not much to say, and there was not much visibility of Dalit organizers or Dalit spaces. But suddenly you had Dalit women coming in from India, and they did a mass tour that included cultural art, rallies, conversation. That was amazing, and it changed the conversation forever. And I cannot underscore that enough. I have again and again, when you talk about organizing against the Sangh, you will have some reference to Dalit Women Fight, Equality Labs, or Tenmui Soundarajan, who is a movement leader in this country, right? And so they are pretty critical in terms of centering how caste is talked about and why we talk about caste. I think the third really critical diasporic movement is Stand with Kashmir and the occupation of Kashmir. Since March, India has been occupying Kashmir for many, many years, right? And the fight against that occupation has gone on for many, many years. But in 2019, something has importantly shifted, right? And this shift has happened because of the Kashmiri diaspora. And there's lots to say about that, but there can be no conversation against the Sangh without talking about the occupation, without talking about what is happening to the Kashmiri people. And that shift has happened because of the Kashmiri diaspora. The other major kind of global movement was the CAA and NRC. The CAA and NRC borrowed heavily from the previous mass movement of the Kashmiri liberation. And I'll show you some clips to demonstrate that. And that was also important. And that was important in terms of how just the number of people that came out, whether that was protesting Modi or protesting the CAA, but also in terms of mobilizing against the Sangh. Right, and it spawned or it helped organize several student campus groups as well against CAA, and with Kashmir also has multiple student groups and a reactionary Hindu Sangh student formation. COVID and the Summer of Black Liberation uprisings that happened the past year also had important significance to our movements. How we have borrowed that language and how we have also participated in those protests and rallies, right? We have been there also. And today you also cannot find a lot of progressive or South Asian spaces that are organizing against things that impact our community without also talking about Black liberation. And then there's the Times Square projection of Ram Mandir that came shortly after the Black liberation risings, which fed into those protests as well. So I just wanted to show a short clip. So this is from January 26, 2020, and this was Republic Day protest. Republic Day in 2020, in the year 2020, saw not only the celebration of the Indian state, but mass protests against embassies across this country. Right, mass protests. And those mass protests included Kashmir. And I know that the larger kind of conversation against that often gets talked about in the Indian media tends to erase this, but Kashmir has always been present. And I just wanted to share this. So this is in Times Square. There was a pro-CAA Sangh protest that was happening, and there was a counter protest. So what does it mean for a largely Indian protesters to use the Azadi slogan without talking about Azadi for the Kashmiri people, right? And so Kashmiri people are always there. And when it is possible for the fight against Hindutva to also include the fight against colonization, that includes colonization of Kashmiri people. Okay, so this is I just wanted to show this. This is the event in Times Square that happened this past year. So this happened during COVID. So it was the first major protest that happened after COVID that had hundreds of people there. And again, in the Indian media, you will see a lot of focus on Indian liberalism, talking about the Indian state, and all of that when talking about the Ram Mandir. But I was there. There were not just Indians there. There were Kashmiris there. There were Bangladeshis there. There were Sikh communities there. There were Khalistanis there. There were everyone possible there who all had their different agendas, and they had all of them were intermingled in fighting against and collectivized in fighting against this, right? It wasn't just the Indians. So I just wanted to. Okay, so how has this changed how we think about organizing in South Asians? We have to build relationships with different movements that go beyond the issue that only affects our particular community. And these relationships cannot be just transactional, but they're fully participatory and collective. We have to think and work towards abolition, because abolitionists and abolition logics are here. Our fights cannot just be about the BJP and Hindutva. It has to be against imperialism, occupation, the military, and the police. We are here to abolish those things. right? And that must be part of our political logics. Liberalism ushers and aids fascist formations. We see this again and again and again. And it is time that we talk about what we need to do in terms of getting this soft kind of push out of how we think about right-wing formations. Recognize the limitations of appealing and lobbying to the US electoralism. If we are against imperialism, we are also against the US state. Right? The US state is an imperial state, and that needs to be recognized in all our fights as well. Right. So without naming any groups, I know of many liberal Indian progressive groups who are lobbying the Indian state using activists and stories that are happening in India. Right, they're using these videos, they're using these stories, but then they're lobbying in India for various things that have nothing to do with India, that are largely symbolic. So what are we doing here? So COVID has changed organizing in ways that we cannot ignore. Right, so this panel is a great example, immediate example of how it has changed. It has changed digital spaces. It has also changed surveillance strategy, ways in which we are surveilled. But it also increased opportunities to expand what we mean by communities. These are just some of the resources that, in case you are interested in going more. Okay, I hope I didn't go over my time, but that was a quick rendition of it. That's all.
Thank you very much, Teresa. You gave us a lot to ponder. So I'm going to move right along to Trevor Jayaraj, just a brief introduction. Trevor is a student in the Aspect PhD program here at Virginia Tech. He completed a Master's of Theological Studies at Columbia Theological Seminary in Georgia in 2019. Before that, he earned an MPhil in English from the University of Delhi. And before that, he had a Master's in English from St. Xavier's College in Tamil Nadu. He frequently writes in Indian journals about issues concerning caste, violence, and representation, specifically about caste in literature and cinema in the South Indian context. His research interests include the issues of memory, identity, violence, and inheritance. And I just spoke to him last week for the first time and learned that he is from the city of Nagarcoil, which is in the very, very southern district of India. And you might have noticed this panel is a heavy South India focus. Our apologies for that, but South India is often neglected, so we're happy for that. So I'll turn it over to you, Trevor.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon, and thank you, everyone, for being here with your presence. Thanks to Shah for putting up this panel event, and thanks to Dr. Peter and everyone involved in this project. And excuse me. And yeah, it's been a heavy week for me, so I may not be as deep as Teresa Matthews, and thanks to Teresa for her engaging presentation. So I'll go in a narrative mode today. I already finished a conference this morning and just zoomed out, but I'm going to do my best. So I want to sort of push back against the sense of discourse that happens within academia to, sort of distantiate yourself from the particular and somehow move towards a sort of a universal way of reasoning. And Achil Membe, in his conversation with Gayatri Spivak, talks about how the modern world continues to be animated by some of the religious reasoning, for instance, sacrifice, salvation, and so on. And that's the sort of paradox I continue to wrestle with on a daily basis, and what it means to come from a religious background, to be specific, a Christian Protestant background, and to engage in the secular realm being denied voices, a sort of pushback against that, which is not always easy. So I'll try my best to recover some of the ways in which I have distanced myself from my own sort of upbringing, thanks to my Protestant grandmom and grandparents, who were quite engaged in the church and life of the church. So so I do not want to appropriate her as sort of a Dalit secular form of reasoning, but more trying to go back and see what I have lost, sort of recovering a sort of a micro history to say. I was talking to Dr. Peter that day and saying the challenges I might continue to face if I want to recover a history of my own, sort of conversion backgrounds and so on. So a brief intro about where I come from is I have sort of Christian priests in my blood, and back from my great grandparents. They were one of the earliest Christian priests in Kanyakumari, Nagarkoil, thanks to the missionary efforts of Salvation Army, and who came to the subaltern groups to, with the message, as you all know, the gospel. And yeah, that's my sort of history and my location where I come from. And yeah, there has been lots of denials. I was talking to Shaw about what it means to engage from these sort of locations, and the ways you subjectify yourself, right? So yeah, I will touch on sort of practices that offer subaltern subjects a way to engage in a increasingly complex, diversified world, and what it means to be inherit these sort of legacies, right, from your parents or from your grandparents and so on, and what does it mean to be in academia, to deny these sort of histories that has been lost. And yeah, this is a a small effort and I'm literally thankful to all of you here for such an occasion. Yeah. So I'll touch on text and also practices as a sort of self-making, if I can use that word. I think Stephen Greenblatt used this, that concept of self-making and self-fashioning, sorry. The way you fashion yourself within modernity, right? And as to how you subject yourself to different practices, in this context, specifically Protestant Christian practices. So yeah. So my grandma used to wake me up literally at 5 o'clock, and I grew up with my grandparents for a while, and she would not give me food unless I recited some words from Proverbs or Psalms, or yeah, these were the two important texts I had to sort of recite on a daily basis if I had to have my food, sort of. So that was the way I disciplined myself into engaging myself in a text. So I wasn't given access to lots of libraries and so on, and I didn't grow up with that sort of inheritance and a sort of yeah, legacy that other elites would have had the privilege to engage themselves in. So, and the way she introduced me to the text pushed me into another direction, that is, okay, let's see what's there out there in the translation, sort of fascination for for the text and the way new English words sort of sounded to me, right? And the ways I literally would push myself against my talented cousins who can who can recite, like, if you know the Psalm 119, it's one of the longest passages in the Bible. So some of my cousins would do that, which I couldn't do. So the way I fashioned myself was through this sort of immersion into the text. And even though I was not bright enough to do that sort of an engagement, unlike my cousins, so there I could see ways in which one can fashion oneself into it. The concept of modernity was slowly emerging because of the ways in which the Tamil translation and the English original, quote unquote original, was in contradistinction, right? In the ways you could read jati in the Tamil Bible, as opposed to, peoples in I think peoples and or races, according to different translations. So that brought to me the understanding of particularity and universality, right? So as to how Christians from dominant caste would go back to these sort of translations and refer to jati as a way of sort of justifying the presence of, not in a direct way, but justifying caste, and perpetuating caste through their recital and through perpetuating these sort of narratives on their sermons and so on. So another background I did not inform is I'm also a pastor's kid. So my both my parents had to preach. They were given equal opportunities to in the salvation. I mean, they have equal opportunity to for both the genders to preach and become leaders. So I used to hear my father both preaching and also importantly being a translator for missionaries from UK and US, and the ways in which these sort of discourses would remind in me the importance of speech, the importance of discourse, and the ways in which you sort of really pick out text and yeah, construct reality right around you, is through these sort of sermons on a daily, almost on a weekend basis, where you go to the church and subject yourself sitting, even though you at times you don't want to sit in the church for a long time, you want to hear these sermons. And yeah, the distinctions between English and Tamil was always on the back of my mind as to how I always aspired for this sort of modernity, to engage myself and to hear, these some of the important narratives that come through in the sermons, the salvation. I mean, the church is about the importance of self-denial. So self-denial is not only sort of at times glorified, it borders on valorizing self-denial as a disciplining ethic that you develop in order to become a good person. I'm using a secular term here, but become holy in a sense, right? So this the reason I want to bring up these sort of narratives is to understand the ways in which these concepts have a secular relevance or a currency, right? In the ways in which current modernity, where capitalism is engulfing all around us, and where we do not have a sense of, at times, most of the times, we don't have a sense of denying certain pleasures. We don't have a sense of denying ourselves things that we do not need, right? Sort of thing. So I badly miss those sort of exhortations on a regular basis, to say, which I think do have a relevance for current malaise or current ills that we go through. So yeah, that's the reason I wanted to go back to these sort of narratives and bring up traditions that has been somehow lost or lost in discourse, right? So what was happening, as I look back through my grandma's exhortations and advice and sort of tough love, is the way in which she always impressed on me the idea of suffering. Without a sense of suffering, you don't get to you don't get to exist in the world, or you don't get to improve on yourself. You don't get to subjectify yourself and self-fashion yourself, right? So that's the sort of import I gather from her exhortations towards suffering as a modern ethic for a time that I'm living in now, right? So yeah, we do have different discourses of suffering, but another important parallel is also the way it's emphasized, the way in which suffering is emphasized in both the private and the public as in the church. Almost every second or the third sermon would somehow emphasize the ways in which we as in the subaltern communities have been subjectified, right, through different sort of denials, from caste, from dominant religions, and so on. So these practices of text and sermons and the way discourse works for a subaltern community, the Christian community, is through these sort of through a at times um, a hard Protestant sort of ethic that's at time can become problematic in a certain sense. So there's that, and I come to the aspect in the as, aspect of the phenomenon of engaging within Sunday schools and dining together after church sort of understanding. So the reason I want to bring in is this. I think this is the way Christians engage in the political, I guess, because the ways we have been denied a mainstream political relevance. So the I guess Sunday schools bring an interesting concept of engaging and listening to the text, and the ways in which you have to literally contest, but also deny yourself that voice because of the cultural context I was placed in most of the time. That is to say, we have so much deference to our elders, and we do not contest the voice from above. So these are of experiences of a self-fashioning would position me in a place where I constantly question myself and said, what is happening, and why am I not able to raise a voice? So often in classes, some of the teachers tell me, why are you speaking so slow, or why are you speaking in a very muffled tone, sort of a sense. I was going back and wondering what was happening through these sort of discourses, and understood that we are always made to be silent, or a silent was a preferred virtue, right? So I think that has relevance in the ways subaltern Christians have been subjected in the ways through an internal process, and also obviously a process that the secular world denies for us. So yeah, and the ways in which one of the few domains or platforms that we get to engage or think about the broader world is through the aspect of charity. So charity, I think I continue to think is the one of the most relevant political engagement that we continue to hold on to. The church continually manifests itself as a sort of a refuge, to use a metaphor, to offer charity to one and all without discrimination, right? Even though the message of the gospel assumes sort of a prominence in the ways in which revelation of the sacred assumes its significance, but the other hand, you are also commanded to love your neighbor. So, and I think Membe asked this question in the conversation I was mentioning, who's our neighbor? So in our secular world, we might have to ask ourselves, who's my neighbor? And I was telling my friends who are also here, I don't get to see a concept or get to practice a concept of the neighbor here in the US, as it used to happen back home. So yeah, what does it mean to practice charity in a world that's increasingly becoming fractured, right? Sort of an understanding was instilled in me back then, thanks to my roots in this sort of a Protestant ethic. So yeah, so the ways, the important discourse here is charity and Salvation Army in this context acts as an important interlocutor in the South Indian context for subaltern groups, I guess. Yeah, at times you are made to deny yourself certain privileges, and we have this practice of allocating money and saving money and denying yourself small pleasures here and there, So as a child, as a kid, I used to be always fascinated with this idea of saving up money and giving to the church. And I never knew where it went when I was growing up, but I knew I was transcending myself and pushing myself out of this obsession with pleasures only for myself. And these sort of concepts helped me to understand the world and to care for people around me, and to exercise a sort of agency, right, through these sort of practices uh, that never come to light often, right? So yeah, the underlying argument for me the theological is the political, right? So these two cannot be separated, or I think it's a violent separation that happens in the secular domain that we inhabit and occupy. So yeah, the theological is the political, especially because the Godhead came to us in human flesh, as it goes in the gospel, right? And the ways in which someone occupying a position of power can engage with the subaltern, engage with someone who has lesser power, and so on. So yeah, another few brief notes to end would be blessings. The narrative of blessings continue to resonate in our sermons, in people's sermons, and so on. And I think it has come to a point where we hear about prosperity gospel and so on. So that's one reason why I like Pentecostalism. For that reason is it retrieves, it's sort of a giving back of capital, the ways in which we have been denied capital and the resources, the economic resources for the subaltern. So Pentecostalism is becoming more popular for these reasons of, because we have inherited a world of inequalities and we must be given back our resources. So I briefly come to what does it mean to live in a racially fractured world for someone who's coming from a caste-driven world, right? So I was thinking back and going and understanding about I used to be a singer and keyboardist and backing vocals, all of those things. And there was always in me a sort of a rebellious position to push back against my mom's desire for me to learn Carnatic music. And the ways in which I engaged in the church boys choir, and I would come up with ideas about, let's do a rap version for this Christmas carol sort of thing. And at one point, I think for one Christmas carol, it became a sort of a hit in our church. So I experimented with that sort of an engagement or my fascination with rap and hip hop. So that's how I came to understand Black music, or came into the realm of to say maybe a big jump, but into understanding Blackness as a sort of engaging the sacred, right? So then I got interested in really Kendrick Lamar and the ways in which he really engages deep theological concepts, especially forgiveness. So forgiveness from God. So I think in one lyrics he says, "God forgive me, for I am a sinner." So yeah, I think that's how we subalterns could engage in these, or enter into the worlds of another reality altogether, right? And to engage with the other is to really enter into their world. So that's why at times I unfortunately don't find secular ways of being in the world not so helpful, because it only makes a rhetorical move towards living and getting to know those who are being denied similar privileges in life, right? So that's how I came to animate my world and understanding of racial equality, thanks to people like Kendrick Lamar, Lecrae, so different sorts of traditions there. So yeah, some concluding notes is that I think I have inherited a world where I have to be thankful for all the intersectional, cosmopolitan and multicultural ways in which subalterns have been given a space within the realm of the church, the theological, to engage ourselves in deeply sort of a self-fashioning sense, right? To make ourselves anew. I think Paul says in one place, you have to be renewed of yourself. So yeah, I conclude on with Paul, though I don't like Paul too much, is to say, at one point he talks about how there is no Jew, how there is no Jew or Gentile, though there is no male or female sort of idea of a cosmopolitan world. The idea where each of us can exist with our complex multiple, belongings in a shared world kind of understanding is what I have inherited from the Protestant faith of my grandmom. And yeah, brief anecdote as I finish is from my advocacy with the past seminary. And there was this friend, and a Black friend, that he was one of the few people I could go and really be like my past self, in a sense, admit myself, confess myself, and say this is what's happening here in the US, and we have been treated this way by the administration and so on. So I know I end on that note because solidarity is not a cakewalk, right? Or solidarity is not just a rhetorical move. Solidarity is not something that you can achieve with just hashtags, right? So solidarity for me continues to be a lived imagination, continues to be a self-making process of understanding yourself by engaging with the world of the other, right? With the world of those who are also suffering like you. And it is this promise of solidarity that on this note of solidarity I end. And I thank people like Shaw, who's been a great friend here, and the ways in I which find similarities in the way we struggle and be of solidarity to each other. Yeah, I end there.
Okay, thank you very much. So officially our program ends in about 10 minutes, but we can go on, whoever wants to. So let's kind of open it up here. Okay, Bonnie has a question here. Bonnie, would you like to express it?
Sure.
Okay.
I'm not here to pick on Isabel Wilkerson's book. First of all, thank you so much. These have been really really thought-provoking remarks from all of our speakers, including you, Peter. And I really appreciate you being here, all of you being here today with us in Blacksburg. I'm going to ask a specific question, thinking about the title of this gathering, Caste, Religion, and Race, and thinking back to this idea of pairing caste and race. And I'm not here to pick on Isabel Wilkerson's great book, Caste, but I do want to bring up Arjuna Padurai's criticism of how when we pair them, we overlook things that are different about them. We think, obviously a big difference in the time periods, with one being lasting for several millennia. He argues that, one is a lot more porous at the bottom levels with more caste mobility occurring. The fact that the meaning of phenotypes and pigment is solidified in a particular case, and is, there's not as much maybe visible reading of people instantly in the caste system. I'm sure that's arguable, but anyway, I'll just curtail what I'm saying and just ask you all if you could each speak to this idea of what is both productive and limiting when we put those two categories, caste and race, together.
Suchitra?
Okay, just responding, Bonnie, as an anthropologist, because this has been discussed in anthropology and up and down. And I think there are some fundamental differences, that anthropologists, and I read this a while back, so there might be more contemporary stuff. But anyways, the argument is that, caste is, it has a pretty strong base in religion, in Hinduism, right? And so it is a different set of concepts that distinguish one caste from another. And what I recall reading is that it makes it that much harder to dislodge because it is based in religion. I mean, that impurity in one group of people compared to another group of people is inherent and grounded in religion, right? Race has, as I know it, I'm no expert, has much more of, there is a historical reason, right? There is a historical reason for defining a race. And yes, I'm sure that it can be tinged with religion and has been tinged with religion God created. But at the same time, maybe conceptually, caste is formulated differently. The hierarchy is based on a religious conceptualization. I just wanted to add something. You had caste, religion, and race, and just today I read a news item on gender. Right? Given that both Bonnie and I work in the gender studies program, that there has been a very high, the report was of rape in communal riots. So rape of, say, Muslim women, for example, and pretty recently, 2002, 2013, into ongoing, of a gendered aspect to that difference. So this was a news report that I read, and I can send it to you if you're interested.
So I'll just add my 2 cents as a historian. Caste, as we understand it today, I think is largely a product of colonialism. And yeah, it has deep roots, but how it's formulated is largely how it was formulated under British colonialism. So I think therefore that caste and race do have, if you look at it that way, caste that way, there is more connection between caste and race. That's just my 2 cents. I don't know if anyone else wants to respond.
So you mean, Peter, that it's been basically, packaged in the way that the BJP has packaged in Hinduism, in a way that, for those of us who grew up in India and we had Muslim friends, and I'm not saying this facetiously, right? Christian friends, that I went to Christian schools. There was no attempt or apprehension that we were being converted, for example. My parents certainly had no such problems with it. So, if I understand you right, what you're saying is that it is like the BJP has packaged Hinduism in a way that I do not recognize.
Exactly.
Right? And so you're talking about caste being packaged likewise. I mean, much of the BJP is upper caste,
Sure.
you know? So
Could we have Teresa
agree.
speak to this?
Go ahead.
Could we have Teresa speak to this?
Or
Yeah.
is Teresa still here? I don't think she.
Oh, I'm here. Sorry.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Yeah, please.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to push back a little bit on this idea that caste came up around British colonialism. Hinduism as a state-sponsored project of elite castes certainly arose in reaction to British colonialism, but the Brahmanism and caste is thousands and thousands of years older.
Oh, yeah.
And so, of course, we all know that, but this idea that British colonialists brought in caste is also an idea pushed by the Hindu right. If you read like the VHP and the RSS and all of their kind of statements that you can find on their websites, it is this idea that a caste was brought in by the big bad British colonialism. That's one of the things that they did, is bring in caste. And we need to like actually push back and say, no, actually it was around a lot longer than that. And just to quickly touch on the original question, I know that there's a lot of conversations around Isabel Wilkerson's, a lot of welcome conversations. We are talking about caste in mainstream North American spaces in ways we never have, and that's really important. But there are important critiques of it. One of it was brought up by somebody, but there are important critiques of it from Black radical thoughts as well. Right, talking about race as something that is interpersonal and something that is not structural, that has nothing to do with capitalism or the police state. All of these are move away from where we are at in terms of Black liberation movements. That critique is important. So for me, with the kind of discussions with what is caste, what is race, those matter, and we should definitely have them. And there's a long scholarship that engages with them. But for me personally, individually, I'm actually far more interested in the ways in which our communities show solidarities with each other. What does that look like? Right? Oftentimes, when we talk about caste, we use Black justice, Black progressive, Black liberation conversations without actually including Black communities or the concerns of Black people, right? And that is a problem. So if we are talking about caste, or it's exactly like race, and that it's a way of kind of analogizing caste to a group of people where we for whatever reason, as a rhetorical tool, then that is an issue. How much are we in solidarity with our Black communities, of our Black siblings and our Black comrades? And that must include a conversation around the police and the military state and having a critique of the US imperialism. Right? All of that must happen if we are going to do this paralyzing of race and caste. Right? And there's also a kind of tendency to think about race as a global phenomena, while caste is a more local phenomena. And we also have to disrupt that. Both race and caste are global phenomena with locally specific meanings, right? Both of them function in those ways, and that's useful. It's a useful way of talking about it. Talking about things when we don't necessarily have the language, but it has to go deeper than that. And for me, that depth comes from building solidarities and being engaged in different communities.
How realistic is that? May I just, I don't know if you're out of time or anything.
I don't know what does that mean.
Okay, so I have a hand raised by, who is it, Purvish?
Go ahead.
Purvish. Go ahead.
Hey, hello everyone. Thank you for your participation. I just have a thought on Bonnie's question on drawing parallels between caste and white supremacy, and also drawing parallels between caste and colonialism. And I think this comes from a video I saw on the Instagram page of the Hindu Yuva committee here at Virginia Tech. So we do have a Hindu Yuva committee here, a Hindu Yuva group here at Virginia Tech. And I remember seeing one of their videos wherein the speaker is comparing colonialism with casteism, and they are kind of justifying casteism, or the kind of saying that casteism is different from colonialism in the sense that casteism is a religious thing, and it has been the objective of casteism or the objective of caste was different from the objective of capturing a country and making them colonized. So the objective of casteism uh, was to divide the society in sections to ensure better functioning of the society, whereas the objective of colonials is to capture the country and exploit the country and and loot them and get the most work out of them. So the objectives are different, and that's why colonialism cannot be compared with casteism, and both are different. And I think Dr. Samantha also talked about it. She said, I mean, given that casteism is an origination of, is a belief of religion, it's not something that has been prepared by the virtue of uh, looting someone or dominating them, but with the virtue of religion. And colonialism is different from that. So just a thought, I got this from, again, the Instagram page of the Hindu Yuva committee here. But what are your thoughts on that? I mean, is that a good justification of how these two things are different, or are they just trying to stand their ground?
I would say that, both involve a hierarchy, right? Both involve a hierarchical relationship. Caste, at least officially, conceptually, involves an interdependence. That has been the justification that you do this job, I do that job, and that it is, by birthright that this kind of occupational uh, 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 definition has been passed down through the ages, right? It still doesn't, of course, justify, I mean, from our point of view at this point in time, it doesn't justify the fact that it is flat out exploitative. I mean, it has come to be flat out exploitative. It sees groups of people as inferior to other groups of people who are superior. I mean, this was my question earlier on to Teresa. I am all for solidarity, but yet I see in India Abroad, and I have stopped subscribing to it. This is a newspaper that has a pretty sizable readership in the US. It comes out of New York. And if you've seen it, Teresa, I don't know, I'm sure you have taken a look at the classifieds. Pretty much most of the classifieds asking a groom for, a bride for, do specify some shape or form of caste, right? And there is a rare classified that says caste no bar. So in other words, we're not interested in caste, right? Anybody can apply. So that is my question, in my own experience growing up in India and having faced this, even in Roanoke, right here, right, with a Brahmin priest. And I am not a Dalit, I am second tier on that caste hierarchy, fairly high up, right, though not at the top. This has been a very real experience. I mean, long ago, so dating one guy, his parents felt I was the wrong caste. That was it. So yeah, we broke off, right? In Roanoke, the priest, he was a Brahmin priest. I would not touch him because he was purer than I was. There was some, we were saying some prayers for my father when my father died. But these rules are very much in place, right here. I could not really just touch the priest and hand him the fruits and all of that stuff, right? So I'm, as I said, all for solidarity. I just unfortunately feel it is so grounded. How do we achieve that solidarity in realistic terms?
I mean, I'm not actually sure. I don't know if I ever, I didn't mean to imply that caste does not exist. If I implied that in any way, that was not my intention at all. Yeah, no, I think caste is very real and we all experience it in different ways. I think my frustration with a lot of the discussion around paralyzing caste and race is that it often erases one group or another, right? So if you're talking about it within, racism, we are talking about it as a caste system, and caste system kind of fades and becomes almost cartoonish in how it's being talked about. And similar things happen with how we're talking about Black American struggles. It's very appropriative, and it's very much denies the complexities of the Black liberation movements in the US. So I think we're all saying kind of the same thing. They have important differences and similarities and useful ways of talking. But what I'm more interested in is how can we recognize that we have some common enemies, and those common enemies are, the supremacies, hierarchies, the military, the police, and those are useful things to fight against, and what that means is actually, and I'm just repeating myself, is to be truly engaged with those struggles, as opposed to, oh, I really like the way you're talking about this, I'm going to borrow that language and use it here. But actually, I'm going to be as committed to your fight as I would be to mine. And I think that's what I see in my organizing, that you cannot just focus on your community. Not only you cannot, it's impossible to, because we are actually interlinked. That's what I see, and that's what I meant. Yeah.
No problem with that. Absolutely, I agree.
But if we keep on, I don't want to contradict Teresa's views here, but if we keep on thinking about enemies, will we ever, this is more of a philosophical question, but then again, if we keep on thinking about enemies, will there be ever peace? If we always think about the other parties as our enemies. So isn't a good way of ensuring solidarities to also include all these other elements in conversation, and not think of them as our enemies?
Yeah, I think I'm not sure how you're perceiving my comment, but I think the colonizers are the enemy. I hope that I think imperial states are the enemy. I think the police are the enemy. So I'm not actually thinking about it in terms of individual human beings and what their personalities or who they are. But thinking about it more structurally and systematically, right? And so, for me, I'm actually often confused when I see a lot of non-Black people engaged in, Black liberation, or talking about Black liberation or Black Lives Matter, and having no critique of the police. How does that work? I don't really understand the logic. This is one example, right? So if you're going to talk about Black Lives Matter, you kind of have to talk about the police. So that's just one example of the ways in which I think, and we have a shared investment in talking about the police. So that's kind of what I meant.
So Teresa, what you're saying, as you know, I think that Bonnie would be on the same page as myself, that you're really talking about an intersectional understanding. And I am definitely going to put gender in there. It is not simply the police. You're really talking about, say, you're going to be really looking at an intersection, whether this is by race, whether this is by class, a political situation or context. All of those are interlinked, right? The military, all of those are interlinked issues, right? It's you cannot, and quite rightly, you cannot. You cannot take any one without the other. Go ahead. That's it. The enemy is multifaceted, in other words.
Okay. I think I'm gonna, Shaw, if you don't mind, call it a day. It's Friday afternoon.
Sure.
But we can stop recording and just chit